Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the wind-chapped world of Mongolian nomads, specifically, into the fur-lined boots of a 12th century herder waking up on the endless steppe with a belly half full of yesterday's arag and a long day of cheese-making ahead. You're not in a stone kitchen, not even in a log cabin. No, your kitchen walls are thick felt, stitched by your mother, your aunt, and maybe a cousin who got distracted halfway through. Your ceiling? A smoky wheel of wooden poles laced with rawhide, the kind of thing IKEA would never try to sell. Your alarm clock? A goat bleating in your ear and the sound of wind threatening to carry your roof away. You probably won't survive this, honestly. But hey, you're made of tough stuff, or at least you will be after your fourth bowl of fermented mare's milk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning smoke curls upward from the hearth, dragging the scent of damp wool, boiled mutton, and last night's fire into your nose. It's not unpleasant. It's just present. You blink away the dryness from your eyes and look around your yurt, your gur, if you want to be proper about it. The felt walls ripple slightly as wind pushes against them, like a hand patting the side of a drum. Somewhere outside, your cousin is already yelling at the goats. Again. You stretch, joints cracking like dried reeds, and shuffle toward the iron stove in the center of the yurt. It's barely warm, just glowing embers nestled beneath a pot of water that always tastes slightly of soot. You sip anyway. You need the heat. Out here, mornings are teeth chattering, even in the golden months. And it's going to be a long day. Your eyes drift to the wooden stand near the yurt's door, where a shallow leather bag sways gently. It holds yesterday's mare's milk, half fermented, slightly fizzy, and smelling faintly like pickled socks. You're not entirely awake until you've had a cup. Or 3. The drink is called arag, and if your stomach doesn't love it yet, give it a week. It's like yogurt, if yogurt were mildly alcoholic and angry about it. You gulp it down, wipe your mouth with your sleeve, and shove open the yurt flap. The world outside hits you like a slap of fresh air and old grass. The steppe stretches in every direction. Flat, rolling, endless. You are a dot in the middle of a living, breathing sea of grass. Herds of horses graze at a distance, tiny against the vast sky. Yaks clump together near the water trough. Your family's gur stands alone on this little rise, but you know that 3 other households are camped just over the next hill, cousins, uncles, people whose names you sometimes forget but whose cheese you never do. And above you? The sky. So blue it hurts to look at. So big it makes your thoughts feel small. You could float right up into it if the wind caught you wrong. But no time for poetry. It's cheese time. You trudge toward the corrals, your boots squelching in mud left by a recent summer rain. A few sheep bleat in protest as you pass. A goat eyes you like it remembers something you did last week. You whistle to your mare, a short, sturdy creature with a personality best described as grudgingly cooperative. She trots over, ears flicking. The Mongols were horse people, are horse people, and in the 12th century, no animal was more central to survival, war, and, yes, cheese. You scratch her neck, whisper a few niceties about how she's the best horse on this side of Karakoram, and gently nudge her toward the milking frame. Milking a mare is not like milking a cow. For one, mares don't just give up their milk. You have to wait for their foals to nurse first, tricking their bodies into letting down milk. Then you swoop in like a sneaky cheese ninja and milk fast before they change their minds. It's a delicate operation. The first time you tried, you got kicked in the knee and cried in front of your uncle. But now? You've got rhythm. Sort of. You collect a few liters of warm, frothy milk into a wood-handled pail and make your way back toward the yurt. The airag bag sways like it's waiting for company. The bag is made from animal hide, often a goat or calf, and never washed. Not once. That's not laziness. That's microbial genius. Inside that bag is a living community of bacteria and yeasts, passed down from generation to generation like a liquid family heirloom. It's what makes the airag fizz. What makes it cheese-friendly. What makes it very much not spoiled, even if it smells like it is. You pour the fresh milk into the bag, give it a few practiced squeezes to mix it with the older liquid, then hang it from a central yurt pole to ferment. Sometimes you stir it with a paddle. Sometimes you just let the wind do the work. Meanwhile, your younger cousin wanders in and hands you a piece of dried cheese, arul, which might as well be a weapon. It's rock-hard, sun-bleached, and shaped like a teardrop. You suck on it slowly while staring at the smoke hole above your head. That's breakfast. Historians still argue whether the Mongols learned these dairy techniques from earlier nomads, or developed them independently. Some think they borrowed from Turkic tribes. Others say this stuff's been swirling in leather bags since before anyone had a name for it. What's clear is that by the 12th century, dairy was everything, from nutrition to tradition to ritual. You finish your cheese shard, crack your knuckles, and give the airag bag one more squeeze. The day is still young, and the curds are only just beginning to think about forming. And so are you. You duck back into the yurt, cradling the last of the morning's mare's milk in your pail. It sloshes softly, still warm from the animal, with a frothy top that smells faintly sour and a little sweet, like warm grass, old leather, and a hint of stable funk. You set it down gently beside the suspended leather airag bag and exhale. This is where the magic begins, or at least, the patient, repetitive labor that eventually becomes magic if you do it long enough and don't screw it up. The next step isn't glamorous. No swirling copper vats. No tiny French thermometers. No linen aprons. Just a pail, some body heat, a bag that's older than you, and enough time to make your fingers go numb from boredom. You crouch low and begin stirring the milk gently, rhythmically, watching the bubbles rise and burst, counting them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, oops, too fast. The trick is not to whip it. Just coax it. Like calming a nervous sheep. Or convincing your grandmother that yes, you did remember to clean the hooves. You set the paddle aside and reach for the strainer, just a simple square of horsehair cloth that smells faintly of smoke in yesterday. It's been washed, but let's be honest, not recently. Hygiene is a flexible concept when you live in a circular house that doubles as a smokehouse and a barn. You pour the milk through it slowly, separating out any stray bits, bugs, or pieces of grass that may have fallen in while you were wrestling with your mare. Then you lift the corners of the cloth, twisting it into a pouch and securing it with a length of sinew. It's lumpy and sagging and already beginning to shift inside as the bacteria do their thing. You hang it on a low wooden rack just beside the yurt wall, out of direct sun but close enough to the stove that it stays warm. Not hot, just cozy. Like a sleeping baby. A very damp, slightly smelly baby. You sit back, stretching your legs out in front of you, and glance around the yurt. Your grandmother is sitting on a cushion near the stove, muttering to herself while stitching new patches into your brother's winter coat. Her fingers are quick, weathered, and a little terrifying. She hasn't looked up once, but you know she's been watching you. Judging your knots. Measuring your patience. She doesn't say anything. She just hums a tune you recognize from early childhood, half lullaby, half warning. Outside, the wind picks up. It always does after breakfast. It whistles under the edge of the yurt like it's trying to join the family. You hear the rustle of sheep hooves, the distant bark of a dog, and your cousin swearing because he's lost the same goat 3 days in a row. Some things never change. You glance back at your curds in progress. They're beginning to stiffen, barely perceptibly. But you know the signs. This isn't your first batch. Though, to be fair, your first batch exploded. Long story. It involved too much heat, not enough stirring, and a dare that you still deny participating in. You tug your boots on again and step outside, blinking into the sun. It's risen higher now, casting sharp shadows across the grassland. A few herders ride by in the distance, their ponies kicking up dust, the riders' long sleeves flapping in the wind like bird wings. Their robes are dyed in faded indigo and dull saffron, colors stolen from plants, berries, and the occasional barter with a Silk Road traveler. You head toward the corral again, this time to check on the goats. Not because they're part of the cheese process, yet, but because goats are professional escape artists and deeply petty. Sure enough, one of them is balancing on a half-buried log like it's auditioning for a traveling circus. You sigh, wave your arms, and eventually convince it to rejoin the herd. Barely. Goats, 1, you, 0, again. Back inside the yurt, the smell is changing. Slightly tangier. More alive. You open the bundle of horsehair cloth gently and inspect the curds. They've thickened. There's a clear separation now between solid and liquid. The whey, pale, slightly yellow, and still warm, is pooling at the bottom. The curds are soft, trembling, like cottage cheese if it had wandered off into the desert and come back tougher. You close the cloth again and adjust the knot. It needs to hang longer, maybe another hour or two. Time on the step isn't measured in minutes. It's measured in instincts, smells, textures. And gut feelings. Always gut feelings. You lean against the yurt pole, sipping another cup of arag. It's fizzier now. A little more bite. A little more kick. Just enough to wake you up without putting you back to sleep. It's said that Chinggis Khan drank arag every morning before battle, not because it made him invincible, but because it kept him regular. That's the rumor, anyway. Historians still argue whether Mongolian cheese production in the 12th century was refined or rustic. Some claim that steppe nomads had surprisingly sophisticated techniques for monitoring temperature and pH, though let's be honest, they didn't call it pH. Others say it was all trial, error, and a whole lot of shrugging. But what's certain is that it worked. Mongols lived on dairy. Traveled with it. Fought with it in their bellies. You don't conquer half the known world on a low-calorie diet. As the curds finish draining, you begin to prepare a shallow wooden bowl, scrubbed clean with sage smoke and ash. You'll need it to press the cheese into shape. But not yet. Patience. In the meantime, you glance toward the small family altar, tucked along the yurt's northern wall. A carved wooden horse's head rests there, polished smooth by generations of hands. You bow your head slightly. Cheese may be science, but out here, it's also spirit. You say a quiet thanks to the sky god Tingri and the ancestors who passed this process down. Even the ones who probably messed it up more than you do. Then you turn back to the bundle of curds and lift it gently. It's heavier now. Denser. Promising. You carry it like a fragile treasure toward the press bowl, heart steady, hands practiced. Because the cheese is ready for the next step. You set the bundled curds gently into the wooden bowl, the way you might lower a sleeping baby, or maybe a sack of gold if gold smelled like goat and fermented grass. The cloth squishes slightly as it settles in, and you reach for the smooth stone weight that lives beside the stove. It's been used for generations, worn on one side where countless hands have gripped it, and faintly marked with a crack that may or may not have come from that one time someone dropped it trying to show off. You weren't born yet, but your aunt still tells the story with alarming glee. The weight goes on top of the bundle, pressing slowly, deliberately. No sudden moves. You want firmness, not mush. This is the moment when the curds decide whether they'll become proud cheese, or dissolve into a regrettable puddle. You squat nearby, watching it like a hawk, occasionally adjusting the cloth, tilting the bowl so the whey drains neatly out through a carved notch in the side. Time passes the way it does in yurts, invisibly. No clocks. No alarms. Just the sun creeping across the felt roof and the whisper of wind pushing through the smoke hole. Your little brother wanders in, hair like a bird's nest, eyes still sticky with sleep. He mumbles something about a dream involving a cheese the size of a horse and then steals a dried fig before you can stop him. Classic. You shoo him out and return to your post. The way has slowed to a trickle now. The curds are tighter, solidifying into something substantial. You untie the cloth gently and unwrap the curds onto a fresh wooden tray. They glisten slightly, pale and lumpy and warm to the touch, utterly unappetizing to anyone unfamiliar, and absolutely perfect to you. Now comes the shaping. You pinch off a small piece and roll it between your palms. It's sticky, pliable, and a little squeaky. You form it into a flat puck, about the size of a plum, and place it on a drying rack near the door. It's a simple wooden frame strung with horsehair twine. Your uncle made it last spring after deciding your old rack was too bent to trust. The fresh pucks join yesterday's batch, which are already stiffening under the breeze. The smell is pungent, earthy, a little aggressive, but reassuring in its way. These discs are your contribution to the family's survival. They'll last months if kept dry and aired properly. They'll ride across deserts, bounce in saddlebags, sit in winter storage beside dried meat and pickled onions. Cheese, for you, is more than food. It's insurance. It's comfort. It's pride. You remember your grandmother saying, if your cheese doesn't make your mouth pucker, you did it wrong. You didn't understand it at the time. Now, you get it. Mongol cheese, Erul, isn't soft. It isn't creamy. It's hard. Sharp. Sometimes sour enough to make your eyes water. But on a freezing night, chewing on a piece beside the fire feels like biting into a memory of summer. Outside, the sun has climbed higher, casting long shadows behind the herds. You step out into the brightness and blink. The rack full of cheese glints slightly, whether from drying whey or some poetic trick of light, it's hard to tell. You sit beside it, plucking a dried blade of grass and chewing on the end, watching the world unfold. Across the camp, a neighbor is tending to his own cheese rack. His discs are larger than yours, but you suspect they're underpressed. He always rushes. Cheese, like revenge and proper yak hair weaving, is best served slowly. Historians still argue whether Mongol cheese was purely a survival food or a culinary tradition with ritual importance. Some records from Chinese envoys suggest certain cheeses were reserved for elders, warriors, or ceremonial offerings. Others argue that dried curds were just whatever you had time to make between skirmishes. Either way, they mattered. And making them, slowly, patiently, consistently, was a mark of someone who could be trusted. Back inside, your mother is boiling water for tea, the fragrant steam wrapping around the smoky air like a hug. She nods at your new batch of cheese. That nod is everything. She doesn't say much, she never does, but you know that a nod means, you did it right. Or at least, it won't kill anyone. You spend the next hour rotating the drying pucks, checking their undersides, flipping the older ones, brushing away the occasional fly. Cheesemaking isn't glamorous. It's not even that fun. But it has rhythm. And in the rhythm, there's comfort. You eat lunch sitting on a wool mat, chewing on dried mutton, sipping broth, watching the cheese dry in the sun. Your sister joins you, picks up a nearly finished disc, and knocks it against the side of the yurt. It makes a sound like a wooden spoon hitting a drum. She grins. That's the sound you want. Hollow, clean, confident. Not too soft. Not crumbly. Just right. A gust of wind rattles the drying frame, and one of the older cheeses tumbles off. You leap up and rescue it, brushing off dust, checking for cracks. It's fine. battle-hardened. You nod to yourself. Cheese, 1, gravity, 0. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Mongol clans believe that hanging cheese discs and certain geometric patterns above the yurt door could ward off bad spirits. Whether or not it works, it certainly keeps the goats from chewing on them. And in this household, that's miracle enough. You glance up at the sky again. Afternoon now. The light is turning golden, and your drying pucks are stiffening nicely. Another few hours and they'll be ready for final storage. Or eating, if your brother gets to them first. You hide one behind a pot just in case. You hum a tune your father used to sing on long rides, a lilting, wordless melody that fits the wind. You press another puck, turn another disc, and breathe in the scent of smoke, milk, and dust. Your hands are sticky, your knees ache, and your back is starting to develop what you're beginning to call cheese posture. But the cheese is coming along beautifully. The sun slants lower now, casting long shadows from the cheese rack that stretch like dark fingers across the grass. The wind has softened, a rare kindness, and the evening hush is beginning to wrap around the camp like a wool blanket. You gather the firmest of the cheese discs from the rack and stack them carefully into a shallow basket woven from dried reeds, lined with wool. They clink faintly against each other, a sound you've come to associate with readiness. Like flint against steel. Like coins against a trader's palm. Your grandmother glances at the basket as you bring it inside. She grunts once, approval, probably, and shifts her weight on the cushion near the stove. The fire crackles, the air inside the yurt turns a little richer, and your fingers begin to thaw. You set the basket down beside the north wall, where finished foodstuffs are stored in neat, modest piles, smoked mutton, cured fat, dried berries, and now, your cheese. It's not glamorous, but it is something real, something preserved, something made entirely by hand in weather and time. You sit back and breathe it in, the sour tang of fermented curds, the dry scent of wool, the ghost of burnt wood. It's strangely comforting. Like a memory you didn't know you were holding on to. But your work isn't over. You reach for the clay jar of salt, coarse, chalky, gray, and dip your fingers in. One by one, you dust the surface of each finished disc. Not too much. Just enough to help it dry further and resist mold. Salt isn't precious in your household, but it's respected. It's brought in by traders who cross mountains and deserts. It keeps things from rotting. It keeps people from dying. You whisper a quick blessing, half out of habit, half out of hope. Then comes wrapping. Not every family wraps their cheese, but yours does. Your mother insists on it. You take narrow strips of old linen, washed so many times the pattern has faded to ghosts, and bind them gently around each disc. This slows drying just enough to prevent cracking and keeps the bugs out. Plus, she says, it makes the cheese look like it was made by someone who knows what they're doing. You stack the wrapped pucks in a second basket and tie the top shut with braided horsehair rope. That batch is done. You'll add it to the saddlebag stash tomorrow morning. The yurt door creaks, and your father enters, brushing dust from his shoulders and shaking the cold from his sleeves. His boots are caked with steppe soil, and his face carries the wind's red kiss. He nods at the cheese, then at you. That nod means pride. Maybe even a story later, if you're lucky. As the evening meal begins, your family gathers in a loose circle around the fire. Stew bubbles in a blackened iron pot, thick with bone, root vegetables, and yesterday's scraps. Your brother is already fishing out the best chunks with the focus of a monk. Your grandmother slaps his hand with a wooden spoon. Balance is restored. You eat quietly, dipping your flatbread into the broth, chewing slowly. A small piece of your newest cheese joins the bowl. It melts slightly, softening the edges of the stew, giving it that sour bite that warms your throat and settles in your stomach like courage. Not fancy. Not refined. But good. Real. Historians still argue whether Mongol cuisine was more a matter of necessity than tradition. Some claim it was a purely utilitarian diet, high in fat, long-lasting, designed for warriors on horseback. Others argue there was a deeper culinary culture, rooted in seasonal cycles, clan rituals, and ancestral reverence. You're inclined to believe both. When food has to travel, it has to be strong. But when it comes from your own hands, your own herd, and your own fire, it's also sacred. After dinner, your father pulls out his morinkur, the horsehead fiddle, and begins to play. The sound is slow, resonant, aching. It drifts through the yurt and into the night like smoke from the fire. Your little sister curls up beside your grandmother. Your brother finally stops chewing. Even the dog seems to listen. You lean back, watching the shadows flicker on the felt walls. The cheese baskets sit quietly in the corner, their linen wraps now faintly stained with salt and whey. They look like relics. Or offerings. Or maybe just food. You're not sure anymore. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some steppe legends say that fermented milk products contain tiny spirits, beings that live between sour and sweet, protecting those who respect the old ways. If you mistreat your curds, they'll vanish. But if you stir gently, feed the fire properly, and speak kindly to the pot, they'll reward you. No one says it out loud, of course. But everyone stirs a little slower after hearing it. The song fades. The yurt quiets. Outside, the stars prick through the black sky, sharp and bright and ancient. You slip outside for a moment, letting the cold bite your cheeks. The cheese rack stands empty now, waiting for tomorrow's batch. A fox barks somewhere in the distance. The wind moves softly over the grass, whispering secrets only the land understands. You smile. Tomorrow, it all begins again. Milking. Straining. Hanging. Pressing. Drying. Wrapping. Storing. Over and over and over, like a wheel rolling through time. You think of the ancestors who stirred milk in yurts just like this, who pressed cheese with the same stone, who whispered the same blessings. You step back inside, let the warmth wash over you, and curl into your bedroll. The felt walls creak gently. The fire pops. Somewhere in the dark, your brother mumbles something about cheese that bites back. And sleep takes you. You wake before the goats. That's not a metaphor, it's an unfortunate fact. Dawn hasn't even cracked the sky yet, but your grandmother is already stoking the fire, muttering softly to the coals like she's trying to coax secrets out of them. The yurt smells like smoke, old milk, and sleep. You push off your felt blanket, roll your shoulders, and step into your boots, which are exactly as cold and stiff as you feared they'd be. Outside, the world is blue and breathless. The kind of cold that bites your nose instantly and fills your lungs with something sharp and clean. The grass crunches underfoot. A few of the animals stir. Your favorite nanny goat flicks an ear but makes no move to rise. Smart. You grab the milking pail, the woven strainer, and the flat wooden ladle, then shuffle over to the pen. The goats are clustered together, chewing cud and pretending they don't know what's coming. You reach for the nearest one, an older doe named Sagan who tolerates you with a level of patience usually reserved for saints, and begin the slow, steady rhythm of milking. Steam rises in little curls from the pail as the milk hits the cold metal. The sound is soft, rhythmic. A whisper of a chore. You hum a low tune as you work. It helps the goats stay calm. Helps you stay awake. By the time the last udder has been emptied and the last pail is sloshing warm and full, the horizon has blushed with pink. The steppe stretches endlessly around you, gold-tinged and silent. Somewhere far off, a bird calls out, like it's trying to remember its own name. You head back to the yurt, arms aching in the good, earned way. Your grandmother takes one pail and nods. Again, no words. Just the nod. It's enough. She pours the milk into a deep pot and begins to warm it near the fire while you strain your own share through cloth into a wide bowl, catching hairs, grass, and whatever else the goats decided to donate. Then, without ceremony, you set the pot near the fire and stir in the culture, the bit of saved soured milk from yesterday's batch. That's the secret. Well, one of them. Mongol cheese doesn't come from fancy ingredients or elaborate methods. It comes from consistency. A good starter culture, passed down, fed daily, whispered to like an old friend, makes the difference between a cheese that curdles right and one that turns into a gloppy regret. You cover the pot and let it sit, stealing a moment to warm your hands over the flame. Here's a quirky tidbit: some families name their cultures. Not formally, but with little nicknames, like Old Lady Gert or Angry Cousin. Supposedly, it helps remind you the culture is alive. That it matters. You're not sure if yours has a name, but your grandmother definitely mutters something under her breath every time she lifts the lid. Could be a prayer. Could be a threat. Historians still argue whether Mongol nomadic households viewed cheese-making as a task divided by gender, or if it shifted with the seasons and the availability of hands. Some say women exclusively handled the dairy while men dealt with herding and meat preservation. Others claim it was whoever wasn't busy chasing down a runaway sheep that day. Judging by your family? It's mostly you, your grandmother, and whoever's too slow to escape the morning chores. As the culture thickens, you prepare the hanging cloths again. The older one from yesterday is still drying near the fire, stained and stiff. You fold it neatly and grab a fresh strip, worn soft by years of use. The curds, once ready, will be poured into it, just like before. Same steps. Different day. But still satisfying. Your little brother stumbles out of his bedding, hair more chaotic than usual, and immediately tries to steal a bite of breakfast. Your grandmother blocks him with a ladle. The yurt is not large, but it contains a universe of rules, and breaking them before sunrise is a bold choice. He sulks into a corner and chews on a piece of dried mutton like a tiny outlaw. Eventually, the milk reaches the right consistency, thick, gelatinous, slightly jiggly like goat-scented pudding. You cut the curds with the ladle in long, clean strokes. Each movement is careful, practiced. You don't rush. You don't stir wildly. You glide through it, letting the whey rise up in pale clouds around the curd blocks. Then you begin ladling them into the cloth. The pail fills again, heavier now, dripping golden whey like it's trying to weep its way to freedom. You hang it from the wooden bar above the fire, the same way your ancestors have done for hundreds of years. The bar creaks a little under the weight, but it holds. It always does. You wipe your hands on your tunic and sit back, watching the whey pool beneath the cloth. The smell fills the yurt, sour, warm, slightly metallic. Your grandmother doesn't smile, but her eyes soften as she pours tea into clay bowls. She hands you one, then grabs the chessboard she made from a carved stone slab and goat bone pieces. You sip slowly, the tea hot and bitter, laced with milk and salt. She makes the first move without a word. You respond in kind. It's not about winning. It's about rhythm. About waiting. About passing time until the cheese decides it's ready for the next step. Outside, the camp has come alive. You hear hoofbeats, laughter, the call of someone rounding up sheep. But inside the yurt, it's quiet, warm, and filled with the slow alchemy of milk becoming food. A transformation so small, so ordinary, and yet so powerful that entire empires have rested on it. You glance at the hanging cloth, already tighter, dripping less. You smile. It's working. Again. The cheese is nearly ready to press again. You can tell by the way the cloth pulls taut at the corners, the way the whey falls now in slow, hesitant droplets rather than a steady stream. You stretch and wince slightly, your back doesn't love the milking stool or the crouch over the fire, but there's a small satisfaction in that ache. It means the process is moving forward. You retrieve the stone weight from its shelf. It's not fancy, just a flattened river rock smoothed from years of handling, etched faintly with old burn marks from times it sat too close to the fire. You place it gently on top of the cheese pouch, careful to center it so it presses evenly. Then you step back and wait. Waiting is an art form out here. You tidy the tools, rinsing ladles, shaking out cloths, resetting bowls. You wrap the leftover milk for the evening's yogurt and skim the cooled whey into a clay jug to feed the pigs later. Nothing is wasted. Mongol households can't afford waste. Even sour milk has a purpose: vinegar, skin wash, or, if things get desperate, very angry porridge. Your grandmother leaves to check on the horses. You stay behind and watch the cloth slowly bulge outward, firming under the weight. Occasionally, you flip it over and rewrap it, redistributing pressure. Not because you were told to, but because you've learned what a rush job looks like, and how terrible it tastes later. Here's a quirky tidbit: some families swore that singing to the cheese helped it set firmer and smoother. Not loud songs, soft ones. Whispered lullabies. Love songs. Even dirty jokes in melodic form. Supposedly, it made the curds relax. Your grandmother rolls her eyes at the idea, but you've caught her humming once or twice. You pretend not to notice. You hum too, now. Not a song with words, just a thread of sound, rising and falling with the flicker of the fire. The cheese doesn't respond, obviously, but it helps pass the time. And out here, time doesn't pass so much as drift. Historians still argue whether this kind of cheese, dry, hard, and nearly indestructible, was made for taste or survival. Some claim it was purely practical, a portable protein brick for warriors on long campaigns. Others insist it carried deeper cultural meaning, tied to ancestral rituals and seasonal cycles. You suspect both are true. When food travels, it must endure. But when it's made by hand, with care, day after day, that's culture. By midday, the sun has climbed high enough to turn the yurt into a slow-roasting oven. The felt walls trap the heat, and every breath feels like soup. You drag the cheese bundle into the shade outside and set it beneath a small awning, just enough airflow to keep it drying, but not so much wind that it turns into a dust magnet. You sit nearby with a wax tablet, scratching a few notes about the batch. Goat's name. Weather. Approximate pressing time. It's not exactly a scientific journal, but it helps track what works and what doesn't. Some families don't bother writing anything down. Others keep entire generational scrolls of cheese records. Your family lands somewhere in the middle, organized chaos. A young neighbor boy wanders past, peeks at the cloth-wrapped bundle, and asks if it's a ghost baby. You snort tea through your nose. He scampers off laughing, probably to tell everyone how weird your cheese looks. Which, to be fair, it does. The pressing cloth tightens into the shape of a squashed melon, its edges frayed and stained. You stroke one edge gently with a fingertip. Firm. Smooth. Slightly springy. Perfect. You unwrap it with care, peeling the linen like skin from fruit. The cheese inside is pale, round, and rough-edged. You smile. Then you cut it into slabs and set them carefully on a low wooden tray to dry in the afternoon sun. The tray sits on a stand above the grass, away from curious dogs and reckless goats. The slabs gleam slightly in the heat, their edges already beginning to harden. From here, it's a matter of patience. The drying process can take days, sometimes weeks, depending on the humidity and temperature. The cheese darkens, toughens, shrinks slightly. Eventually, it becomes hard enough to survive nearly anything: heat, frost, travel, war. You've even seen your uncle use a block of it as a makeshift hammer once. The cheese survived. The nail did not. Afternoon stretches long and golden. You take shelter beneath a willow tree, watching the cheese and letting your thoughts meander. You think about how many steps it took to get here, the milking, the straining, the heating, the culturing, the cutting, the pressing, the drying. None of it glamorous. All of it necessary. You remember stories your grandmother told about warriors riding for weeks with nothing but cheese and dried meat in their saddlebags, how they'd soak the cheese in broth to soften it, or grind it into powder and mix it into tea. How even emperors requested it as tribute from border clans. It's funny. You're just one person in one yurt on one patch of grass, making food the same way it's been made for centuries. But somehow, that little cheese puck might travel farther than you ever will. Might end up on the saddle of a soldier, or the tray of a merchant, or the offering table of a shaman. Might sit in someone's palm halfway across the steppe and remind them of home. You swat a fly, yawn deeply, and watch the slabs stiffen in the sun. The smell is mellow now, nutty, rich, almost sweet. You wrap one in cloth and tuck it into your pocket. A snack for later. A gift for your brother. Or maybe just a reminder. You've done something that matters today. Not loudly. Not spectacularly. But solidly. Quietly. Permanently. Later that evening, the sky stretches into a canvas of lavender and charcoal. The sun slips behind the hills, and the first pinprick stars emerge like shy campfire guests. You gather the drying cheese slabs into a basket, wrapping each one in cloth, careful not to crack the edges. They're still a little soft at the center, not quite ready for long travel, but well on their way. The basket smells like sunshine, smoke, and satisfaction. You carry it into the yurt, where the fire is already crackling low. Your grandmother gives a small grunt of approval when she sees the basket. It's the closest thing to praise you'll get tonight, and that's okay. She hands you a strip of dried mutton and some broth with herbs and goat milk, and you eat slowly, surrounded by shadows and the murmur of voices from neighboring tents. Tonight's breeze carries a hint of sagebrush and distant horses. The goats are tucked in. The sky is full. You should sleep, but instead, you sit by the fire, poking embers, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. Because the cheese is only the beginning. In the next few days, some of the slabs will dry fully and be stored for winter. Others will be fermented further, buried in airtight leather pouches, transformed into something stronger, sour, hard, nearly eternal. Your family calls it by different names depending on the method: biaslag, arul, kurud. Each with its own texture, its own tang, its own place on the table or saddlebag. You think of your uncle again, the one who travels with the horse herders each spring. He once told you that chewing a piece of old arul in a sandstorm could bring you back to life. Or at least, make you forget you're dying, he'd laughed. It sounded dramatic, but having tasted some of his stash, you believe it. Here's a quirky tidbit: some arul is so hard it's nicknamed teeth breaker. Kids gnaw on it for hours. Elders soak it in tea. Horses, allegedly, love the smell but hate the taste. One goat once stole a piece and regretted everything immediately. Historians still argue whether Mongol cheese-making influenced other steppe cultures or was independently developed across the region. Some claim the nomads passed along techniques as they moved, tiny microbial legacies spreading from yurt to yurt, clan to clan. Others suggest the conditions of the land, dry winds, wide space, endless herds, simply led everyone to similar solutions. Either way, the cheese endures. And with endurance comes trade. The next morning, your cousin arrives on horseback. His cheeks are windburned, and his coat smells like the road, but he's smiling. The traders are setting up camp, he says, and they're asking for cheese. You grin. This is the part you like best. You follow him across the open plain, past scattered yurts and grazing animals, toward the outer edges of the encampment. There, several merchant carts are being unloaded, sacks of barley, bolts of Chinese silk, carved wooden tools from the forested north. The traders were layers of dyed wool, some stitched with silver thread, others patched with leather and lined with fur. Their accents blur across dialects like smoke over a fire. You greet them with your best adult face, shoulders square, chin high. You're holding the basket of semi-dried cheese, cloth-wrapped and fragrant. One trader, a stout man with a salt and pepper braid, nods as you approach. He picks up a slab, sniffs it, breaks off a piece, chews, and smiles. "Good batch," he says. "Spring milk?" You nod. "Mostly from Saigon," you add, just because it feels right to say her name out loud. He nods again, respectful. "We'll take 10 pieces. Barley in exchange?" You haggle a bit, modestly, as your grandmother taught you, and settle on 10 pieces of cheese for a mix of grain and a tiny pouch of candied nuts. A fair trade. One you'll share with your brother, even if he doesn't deserve it. By midday, more families have arrived, and the air fills with voices and the occasional neigh or bleat. You recognize a merchant woman from last summer. She once traded you a small mirror for 3 pieces of kurud. She catches your eye and waves. "Got the hard stuff?" she calls, teasing. You pull a piece of aged arul from your tunic. "Careful," you reply. "This one might chip your tooth." She laughs and hands over a bundle of dried apricots. Everyone wins. It's not just trade. It's recognition. Your cheese isn't just food, it's a product of the land, of your hands, of the rhythm your ancestors laid down long before you could walk. Each batch carries that quiet legacy. Each exchange is a little nod of acknowledgement from one life to another. Later that evening, back at the yurt, your grandmother slices open a dried slab and shares it with the family. The texture is dense. The flavor? Tangy, nutty, and a little smoky. Your brother makes a face like he just bit a fence post, but then asks for more. Your father, who rarely speaks during meals, gives a short grunt and a tiny smile. You've done well. And you'll do it again. Tomorrow. Next week. Next season. Because this isn't a one-time triumph. It's a cycle. An ongoing, living practice. Like spinning the wind into thread. Like telling stories to the fire. Like waking before the goats. The next morning begins, as most do, with breath like fog and goats that have already made up their minds about the day. You pull on your tunic, still stiff from yesterday's sun, and head outside into a world washed pale by dew. There's no rush, no alarm bells, just the gentle, relentless rhythm of nomadic life, chores, animals, cheese. You check the racks first. Yesterday's slabs are drying nicely, edges firm, centers dense, some with tiny salt blooms that look like frost kissed them overnight. You flip them, turning each one like pages in a book, so they harden evenly. Then, just before breakfast, you pull a fresh cloth from the basket and prepare to start another batch. Because cheese, like the sun and the wind and the way your grandmother sighs when no one's looking, is never really done. It's part of a loop. You're already thinking about tomorrow's milk before you finish shaping today's curds. While the milk heats, you feed the fire with dung cakes and sing under your breath, nothing dramatic, just something to keep your mind steady. This batch feels different already. The milk's a bit richer, probably from the spring herbs the goats found yesterday. They came home with mouths stained yellow and purple, like tiny drunkards. You scrape the sides of the pot as it simmers, watching for the gentle ripple that means it's almost ready. Your fingers smell like smoke and sour cream. Not glamorous, but oddly comforting. Here's a quirky tidbit: Mongol cheese isn't just food. It's also a tool. Dried slabs were sometimes carved into shapes to entertain children or used as barter when metal coins were scarce. There's even an old tale of a herder carving a tiny horse from cheese and accidentally starting a marriage proposal. The details are vague, but it apparently ended well, unless you were the cheese. Historians still argue whether Mongol women specialized in cheese-making more than men, or if duties rotated based on herd size, clan structure, or sheer stubbornness. What's clear is that it was considered a domestic art, but one that touched almost every sphere of life. From home to trade to war. You can feel that weight sometimes. Not pressure, exactly, more like echo. You're doing something that's been done for 1,000 years by people whose names you'll never know, but whose hands probably moved the same way, lifted the same pot, hummed the same off-key song. Later that day, as the cheese drains in its cloth, you get a rare treat, a visitor from another camp. It's your cousin, again, though cousin could mean anything from mother's sister's child to my grandfather's 10 neighbor's grandson. Nomadic family trees aren't always neat. But his horse is muddy, and his grin is familiar, and he has news. There's a festival brewing, he says, dropping to the ground beside the fire. Out past the white hills. Traders, storytellers, archers, the whole mess. You glance toward your grandmother, who raises an eyebrow but doesn't say no. Which, in this house, might as well be a yes. You spend the next day preparing cheese for the trip, not just for eating, but for gifting, sharing, showing off. You pick your best slabs, the ones that dried just right, with even color and no cracks. You wrap them in linen and tuck them into a saddle pouch alongside dried fruit, a small bone comb, and your favorite spoon. You're not sure why the spoon comes, it just feels right. The journey is bumpy. Days on horseback, nights under stars, quick meals of milk tea and wind-dried meat. The cheese slabs hold up beautifully. You gnaw one during a thunderstorm and realize it tastes better wet. Or maybe that's just your mood. Finally, the white hills come into view, and beyond them, the festival. It's chaos in the best way. Tents sprout like mushrooms across the valley, fires flicker like 1,000 eyes, and everywhere you turn, someone is offering food, song, or competition. Horse races thunder across the plains. Wrestlers slap their thighs and grin at each other like lions in wool tunics. Children run wild. Dogs bark at nothing and everything. You set up beside your cousin's tent and unroll your cheese. Not for sale. Just for sharing. People stop by, sample a bite, nod thoughtfully. One old woman asks if you use river stones or shoulder bones for pressing. Another compliments the fermentation timing. A young man tries to steal a piece and gets whacked with a spoon, your spoon. In the evenings, people gather around fires and trade stories. You sit quietly, listening, chewing cheese that tastes like work and sun and smoke. You catch snippets of tales, kings who rode eagles, rivers that sing, a shaman who married the moon. You offer a few of your own. Nothing dramatic, just the one about the goat who got drunk on onion grass and fell into a well. It gets a laugh. Success. Someone passes around a bowl of fermented mare's milk. You sip, wince, sip again. The taste is somewhere between yogurt, vinegar, and regret, but it warms you from the inside out. Someone else hands you a chunk of foreign cheese, soft, salty, wrapped in leaves. It's good. You nod appreciatively. They nod back. Mutual respect. The next morning, you trade 2 slabs of your cheese for a decorated belt buckle. It's not a fair trade in the economic sense, but it feels right. The man says his brother used to make cheese like yours before he married into a forest clan. You give him an extra piece. Just because. By the end of the 3rd day, your pouch is lighter, your heart fuller, and your legs extremely unhappy. But it's been worth it. You pack the remaining cheese carefully, double-wrapped and cushioned in wool. On the ride back, you look over your shoulder often, not because you're worried, but because you're trying to memorize the hills. The sounds. The colors. The cheese will last. But the festival will fade. And you want to remember both. You return home to a yurt that smells like home should, of smoke, wool, and faintly sour milk. Your grandmother doesn't say much, she never does, but she checks your cheese pouch the way a blacksmith might inspect a sword. She unwraps one slab, breaks off a corner with her teeth, chews slowly, then nods. That's it. Your entire trip, your whole effort, acknowledged with a silent nod and the faintest upward twitch at the corner of her mouth. You feel 10 feet tall. The next few days are quiet, but not still. Summer is in full swing, and that means long mornings, sweltering noons, and the kind of evening breezes that whisper across your shoulders like old friends. The cheese routine settles back into its rhythm. You milk. You strain. You stir and simmer. It's less exciting now, no festivals, no traders, but in a way, that's comforting. Because here's the thing no one tells you, the quiet parts are where mastery is made. Your hands know the temperatures by feel. You no longer second-guess the weight of a curd-filled cloth. You can tell from a sniff whether the milk's turned or if it's just playing tricks. You hum while you work, not for any reason, just because silence feels incomplete without it. One morning, you wake to find hoofprints near the stream. Not goat. Not horse. Camel, maybe. You follow them for a while, sandals squishing into damp earth, but they disappear into the grass. Could be a traveler. Could be a spirit. You shrug and head back. Cheese waits for no one. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Mongol families used to hang cheese slabs in the yurt rafters not just to dry, but to listen. It was believed the cheese would absorb the wisdom of conversations, prayers, and songs carried on the smoke. Whether it made the cheese smarter is debatable, but it definitely made the ceilings look impressive. Historians still argue whether these cheese traditions originated with the Mongols or were inherited from even earlier steppe cultures like the Xiongnu. Some believe the cheese-making methods migrated along with pastoralism itself. Others claim the Mongols refined these practices uniquely, adding layers of ritual and practicality you don't find elsewhere. You don't worry about it too much. You just keep making cheese. Then, one afternoon, a strange sound wafts into camp. Not hooves, not carts, voices. Loud, unfamiliar, and distinctly southern. You peek over the hill and see them, a caravan, big and colorful, with cloth tents and tall banners flapping in the wind. Foreign traders. From the cities. Maybe even China or Samarkand. Your family greets them cautiously. Trade is always welcome, but trust is earned slowly, especially on the steppe. You watch from a distance, clutching a cheesecloth in your hands, pretending not to care. But then one of the traders, a woman in a velvet robe and gold-threaded sash, steps forward and gestures toward your yurt. "Who makes the cheese?" she asks. You blink. "I do," you say. Your voice cracks halfway through the sentence. She smiles. Soon, she's seated in your yurt, your grandmother pouring her tea. You present the cheese, both the fresh and the aged slabs. She tastes them carefully, nodding with the deliberateness of someone who's tasted too many mediocre things in her life. Then she points to the sharpest slab, the one you aged with extra salt. "This," she says, "tastes like my childhood." You're too stunned to respond. She ends up buying a full pouch's worth, offering not just grain, but tiny silk packets of dried orange peel and a tin of dark, bitter tea. "For balance," she says. "For contrast." That night, you sip the tea with a piece of your sharpest cheese and realize she's right. The bitter and the sour. The smoke and the citrus. Somehow, it works. The next day, your brother tries to copy your cheese. He ends up curdling the milk too fast, and the result smells like tragedy and boiled socks. You try to be supportive, but mostly you just laugh and make him clean the pot. Later, you sit with your grandmother as she braids goat wool into rope. You ask her if she ever made cheese when she was your age. She nods, but doesn't elaborate. You press a little. Did yours taste like this? She pauses. Worse, she admits. Then adds, but I didn't know it at the time. You grin. It's the closest thing to a compliment you'll ever get. That evening, you do something new. You mix a bit of wild thyme into one of the drying slabs. Just to see. It smells strange, good strange, but still strange. Your brother sniffs it and says it smells like old goat who ate a garden. You call it your secret recipe. He calls it a mistake. We'll see. Sometimes, you wonder what your cheese would taste like to someone in a city, someone who's never squatted beside a smoking pot or milked a goat with a grudge. Would they even know what they're tasting? Would they spit it out and ask for something soft and bland and wrapped in silk? You hope not. Because this isn't just food. It's memory, pressed and salted. It's sunlight and wind and all the mornings you didn't want to get up but did anyway. It's everything you've learned, and everything your ancestors whispered through smoke and song. And it keeps. That's the best part. The cheese will last long after the camp moves. Long after the goats forget your name. Long after you've gone to other places, tasted other foods, met other people. It will endure. Just like the land. Just like the wind. Just like you. You're almost out of rennet. Not something most people think about first thing in the morning, but when your whole livelihood, or at least your entire afternoon, depends on curdling milk just right, it becomes a minor crisis. You hold the little pouch up to the light, squinting at the grainy bits of dried calf stomach inside like they're sacred treasure. There's enough for a few more batches. Maybe. If you're careful. You know what this means, it's time to make more. So you saddle your pony, load up your knife, your water gourd, and a very old, very faded guide your grandmother gave you that's less a map and more a list of vague directions and vaguely threatening warnings. You're headed to visit the local herder who specializes in rennet preparation, an elder by the name of Awaken, known equally for his skill and his tendency to fall asleep mid-conversation. You ride for hours. The plains stretch forever, broken only by the occasional shrub or confused sheep. Your thighs ache, your back complains, but eventually, you spot the distant smudge of a yurt on the horizon. Smoke curls lazily from the top. You follow the scent of fermented mare's milk and boiled meat until you reach Awaken's camp. He greets you like an old friend, though you've only met once before, when you were barely tall enough to see over a cheese rack. He claps your shoulder, offers you a bowl of something so sour your nose retreats into your face, and motions you to sit beside his fire. The trade begins, as all Mongol trades do, with small talk and competitive politeness. He asks after your grandmother. You ask about his gout. He tells a long story about a goat that outran a pack of wolves, which may or may not be metaphorical. Finally, he pulls out a small, bone-carved case filled with neatly dried slivers of rennet. They smell faintly like leather and salt. You offer cheese in return. He samples each one like a judge at a royal banquet, nodding, squinting, then finally selecting 2 slabs, one sharp, one herby. You've learned, he says simply. You beam like you've been knighted. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Mongol rennet makers were known to chant softly during the drying process, believing that certain vowels helped preserve the potency of the enzymes. It's not clear if the rennet listened, but the cheese certainly turned out fine. Historians still argue whether Mongol food preservation methods, cheese, dried curds, fermented milk, were superior to those of their sedentary neighbors. Some say they were simply pragmatic. Others point to the astonishing portability and longevity of these foods, arguing that it gave Mongol armies a massive logistical edge. After all, you try keeping a wheel of brie intact during a cavalry raid. You ride back with your new rennet, the wind at your back and the sun just low enough to make everything look golden. The world feels enormous and small at the same time. You stop once to let your pony drink and munch a piece of dried cheese while watching a hawk circle overhead. Life on the steppe is many things, but boring isn't one of them. When you return, it's nearly night. The goats grumble, the fire's down to embers, and your grandmother is pretending she wasn't worried. You hand her the rennet pouch like a soldier returning from battle with a sacred relic. She opens it, sniffs, nods. This will do. High praise. The next day, you try a new batch with the fresh rennet. The milk curdles faster, tighter. It's a little more sour than usual, but in a way that works. You hum one of Erkin's strange vowel chants while you stir, part joke, part curiosity. The cheese comes out better than ever. Later that week, a small group of warriors camps near your family. They're headed west, toward trouble. You don't ask questions. Warriors don't share details with cheesemakers. But one of them notices you're drying racks and asks to try a piece. You give him the spiciest one, just to see if he flinches. He doesn't. Instead, he nods, then tucks 2 slabs into his saddlebag without another word. You feel oddly proud. Because your cheese isn't just surviving, it's traveling. Crossing landscapes. Joining stories. And stories are what everything boils down to in the end. You carve another notch into your windowsill. Your donkey doodle now has a companion, a tiny cheese wheel with legs. Artistic talent still lacking, but enthusiasm high. You try fermenting a batch of curds in a sealed pouch with wild onions. It smells like betrayal, but after a few days, the taste is surprisingly mellow, smoky, earthy, strange in a good way. You call it accidental wisdom. Your brother calls it definitely cursed. You don't argue. The days get shorter. Nights cooler. The wind whistles differently. You know what that means. Migration is coming. Nomads move with the seasons. Always have. Always will. You begin preparing for the move, packing cheese into tightly bound leather pouches, marking which slabs are oldest, which are still soft, which will travel best. It's a lot. But it's worth it. One evening, you sit by the fire, nibbling cheese that tastes of pine smoke and thyme, and realize you've come a long way. You started this as a chore, a routine, a smelly obligation. But now it's something else. It's legacy. It's yours. And tomorrow, it will move with you across new hills, past unfamiliar trees, under stars that watch silently while your goats snore and the cheese does what it does best. Wait. Change. Endure. You're moving. Not just you, of course, the whole camp. The goats, the yurts, the people, the dogs, the crates of things you forgot you owned. It's a massive, dusty ballet, performed to the rhythm of shouted instructions, creaking carts, and the occasional goat-related curse. You've done this before, dozens of times, but it never stops feeling like you're packing up your entire soul and placing it carefully on the back of a shaggy animal that may or may not walk straight. You secure your precious cheese bundles inside a large wicker basket, padding them with sheep wool and wrapping the oldest slabs in oiled hide. Some families carry cheese in wooden boxes carved with family symbols. You don't have one of those yet. One day, maybe. For now, your basket creaks ominously as you load it onto the back of a mild-mannered yak named Ochre. Ochre doesn't care about your cheese. But he also doesn't care about walking in a straight line. So that's fine. As the caravan sets off, you glance back at the spot where your yurt once stood. The earth's already beginning to forget you. All that's left is a ring of flattened grass and a faint scent of ash and smoke. It always feels strange, like you're leaving a piece of yourself behind. You walk most of the way. Everyone does. Riding is for children, the elderly, or those with terrible blisters. You trudge through wide plains, narrow valleys, across streams that splash your knees and freeze your ankles. The land changes slowly but surely. The air smells different. The goats complain more. You don't blame them. Here's a quirky tidbit. During migrations, Mongol families often carried bundles of old smoke-scented yurt felt to seed the scent of the new home. It was believed that bringing the old fire smell helped the spirits recognize the family. Whether it worked or not, the result was that every new camp already smelled like memory. Historians still argue whether the cheese carried during these migrations was primarily for sustenance, trade, or ceremonial use. Some records suggest certain aged slabs were saved for specific festivals or rites, others imply it was simply practical, calorie-dense food for long travel. Your family does a little of both. One slab you carry has been aging since last summer, bound in cloth and blessed by your grandmother during a thunderstorm. You're not sure if it's edible or sacred. Maybe both. You camp under the stars, wrapped in wool and exhaustion. The fire crackles. Someone plays a jaw harp in the distance, its metallic twang echoing across the dark. You eat a piece of travel cheese, hard, dry, a little smoky. It tastes like dust and memory. Perfect. By the third day, your calves feel like they've been replaced with cured yak meat. You're not even sure they bend anymore. But you keep moving. You pass another caravan heading in the opposite direction. They look like they've been on the road for weeks. One rider calls out, asking if you've passed a shepherd with a limp and a white dog. You haven't, but you wish him luck. He offers a slice of cheese wrapped in linen anyway. You trade one of your time slabs. Both of you pretend not to notice how dry the other's cheese is. It's the thought that counts. By now, you've begun to recognize your destination, not because there's a sign or a landmark, but because the land feels right. The grass is thicker here. The wind smells like water. The elders nod, murmuring approval. The goats prance with more enthusiasm, which is to say, they walk slightly less begrudgingly. You arrive just before dusk. Setting up the yurt is second nature, poles, felt, ropes, smoke hole, done. You settle in like a seed into new soil. You unload your basket of cheese with the care of someone cradling priceless manuscripts. Nothing broken. Nothing spoiled. One slightly squished slab, but that's just character. The fire is lit. The dogs curl up. The sky turns violet and then black. You breathe in the smell of new grass and old cheese, of smoke and wool and moving forward. The next morning, life resumes like you never left. You build a drying rack from fresh-cut branches. The new wind has a different tone, it hums rather than whistles. Your cheese will age differently here. You can already tell. Maybe it'll be softer. Maybe saltier. Either way, it will belong to this place. That's how it works. You catch your brother trying to nibble the sacred slab. You throw a stick at him. He throws a fig at you. The fig is ancient. Possibly petrified. It hits you with the force of a small moral lesson. You forgive him. Eventually. You decide to experiment again. This time, with ground juniper berries and a pinch of river clay. Your grandmother raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. You take that as encouragement. You name the batch Hopeful Regret and set it on the top shelf to age. A visitor arrives 2 days later, a monk in travel-stained robes, clutching scrolls and smelling faintly of horse. He stays one night, tells stories by the fire about distant cities and strange cheeses made with ash and herbs. You offer him your time slab. He offers you one wrapped in tree bark. It tastes like moss and secrets. You love it. He leaves before dawn. You watch his silhouette vanish across the hills and wonder what it would be like to carry your cheese to distant lands, to have someone bite into it and say, "Ah, this tastes like the steppes." You imagine a shop in a faraway market, shelves of sharp, smoky, crumbly slabs labeled with names like Sunset Goat or Ochre's Regret. You smile. Then the wind shifts. You sniff the air. The curds need flipping. Time to work. You flip the curds with your fingers, slowly and gently, the way your grandmother taught you, though she'd insist your hands are still too heavy, your motion too hasty. But practice has smoothed your clumsiness into a kind of rhythm, and now your fingertips glide through the softening surface with confidence. The cheese is coming along well here. The air is just humid enough, the night's just cool enough. The step, like any good host, is quietly helping you. The morning is foggy. Not the dramatic mountain kind, but low, soft mist that drapes itself across the grass like a sleepy animal. Your goats seem slightly offended by it. You offer them encouragement and a stern lecture about dairy productivity, which they ignore as usual. You sip a bowl of warm fermented mare's milk and begin inspecting each slab. One of them, an experimental blend of old curds and crushed wild herbs, has developed a promising skin. Slightly waxy, but fragrant. You tap it gently, as if knocking on the door of flavor. In the background, your grandmother hums while arranging bundles of dried nettle. She claims nettle helps ward off curd mold demons. You're not sure if that's metaphor or tradition, or both. Either way, she insists on draping nettle over the cheese racks like garlands. It gives the whole thing a slightly magical vibe. You don't mind. Here's a quirky tidbit: Mongol families often smoke cheese not just for preservation, but because they believe the smoke infused it with memory, as in, actual ancestral memory. Some say certain families claim to taste long-lost battles, love stories, or entire migrations in the sharper wheels. You've yet to taste romance in your cheese, but you did once think a slab reminded you of your uncle yelling about tax collectors. So, maybe there's something to it. Historians still argue whether Mongol dairy practices originated independently or borrowed from Central Asian and Middle Eastern methods during earlier periods of contact. Evidence points both ways: cheese presses found near ancient Silk Road sites, or step-specific traditions involving wind drying and smoke curing. One theory suggests the cheese-making evolved in tandem with horseback travel, adapting to saddlebags and salt. Speaking of saddlebags, your aunt arrives that afternoon with news of a marriage celebration 2 valleys over. Which means, naturally, a cheese exchange. You're thrilled. Not because of the wedding, though the gossip will be spicy, but because other herders will be there. New techniques. New tastes. Maybe even a cheese you haven't seen before. You prepare your offerings with care: a firm slab wrapped in bark and beeswax, a sour one flecked with nettle seeds, and a tiny round of fresh goat cheese packed in a gourd. You even take hopeful regret, not for trade, just to show off. The journey to the celebration takes a day, but the landscape makes it feel shorter. You cross rolling hills that smell like pine smoke in last year's rain. Along the way, you pass another herd and wave to the herder, who nods solemnly and then promptly sneezes into his sleeve. The goats ignore you both. You arrive just before sunset. The valley is already humming with activity: riders, children, campfires, carts stacked with textiles and dried fish. There's music, lutes and flutes, and a voice trying very hard to hit the right notes. You spot yurts strung with colorful wool banners and tables sagging under the weight of meat, bread, and, yes, cheese. You join the circle of dairy traders like a warrior entering a council of elders. Everyone pretends not to be competitive. Everyone is lying. You display your wares with modest pride, and immediately the gossip starts: who aged that slab? What herbs are those? Is that a goat milk, yak milk blend? It is. You invented it last week. An old woman with a scarf the color of storm clouds tastes your sour slab and nods once, sharply. A young man with a nervous mustache offers you a cheese that smells like pickled thunder. You exchange bites, grins, a few polite insults. And there, near the edge of the circle, you taste something unforgettable. It's soft, creamy, speckled with dried plum. A little smoky. A little sweet. You close your eyes. It tastes like twilight. You glance at the maker, a quiet girl your age, wearing a robe dyed with indigo and saffron. She smiles, the kind of smile that says, "I know it's good." You nod slowly, a sacred gesture of cheese-based respect. She tells you the cheese was aged under stones, turned every day for a moon cycle. She doesn't say much more. Cheesemakers are like that. You ask if she wants to try yours. She does. She chooses hopeful regret. She chews, eyes closed. Then opens them and says, "Interesting." You laugh. "That bad?" "No," she replies. "It tastes like a good mistake." You talk for a while, mostly about dairy and drying racks, but also about goats and ghosts and why thunder sometimes tastes like copper. She gives you a slice of her plum cheese. You trade one of your Herbie slabs. It feels like a fair deal. You return home the next day, tired but buzzing with ideas. You unpack your new cheeses carefully, like scrolls of secret knowledge. The goats greet you with ambivalence. Your grandmother inspects your offerings and mutters, "You didn't marry anyone, did you?" You roll your eyes and feed her a slice of stormplum cheese. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't spit it out either. A win. You scribble notes in your leather-bound cheese journal. You draw a diagram of a new drying rack design. You hum the melody someone was playing at the wedding feast. You hang a strand of plum pits near your rack, for luck, or for memory, or just because it looks nice. The moon rises. The air cools. The cheese matures. And so do you. You wake to the sound of hooves and distant voices, a rhythmic clop and murmur that tells you visitors are arriving. It's not uncommon for neighboring clans to drop by unannounced, especially when the season is generous and the cheese is even more so. You hurry to smooth your hair and brush last night's crumbs off your tunic. Guests mean conversation, news, maybe even a friendly cheese-off if the mood strikes. The caravan pulls in with a puff of dust and a creaking of ox carts. You spot familiar faces, cousins, friends, that one guy who always pretends to know more about salt ratios than he actually does. They greet you with wide grins and dramatic hugs, some of which knock the air from your lungs. A pair of elder women sit down and immediately begin trading gossip over steaming bowls of butter tea. You know it's serious when the word yak is whispered in hushed tones. Naturally, the cheese comes out. You bring out your latest batch, the thyme slab, the nettle one, a surprisingly creamy will from a second curd pressing you almost threw away. Everyone gathers, tasting and nodding, debating textures and mouthfeel like a council of culinary wizards. Your aunt brings out her dried curd beads, hard, sharp, meant to suck on during long rides. A small child gnaws one like it's a prize. One of the visitors offers something new, a soft cheese wrapped in boiled reeds. It smells earthy, tangy, and a bit like wet moss. It's divisive. Your grandmother calls it bold. Your little brother calls it mud. You think it's excellent. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Mongol cheeses were flavored with animal bile, not for taste, obviously, but for medicinal purposes. Supposedly, a tiny smear could cure stomachaches, purify bad spirits, and clear cloudy thoughts. Whether that's true or just a side effect of intense disgust is up for debate. Historians still argue whether the Mongol taste for dairy extended into diplomacy. There are records suggesting that cheese and fermented milk were offered as tribute to visiting envoys or used as symbols of goodwill during negotiations. Some accounts even claim that Genghis Khan himself favored sharp, aged curds and accepted them as part of warrior tributes. You like to think he had a favorite cheesemonger, probably a grumpy genius with wild hair and impeccable taste. As night falls, your visitors settle in for music and stories. A man with a deep voice tells of a cheese that cured heartbreak. A woman counters with a tale of curds so sour they drove off a pack of wolves. Children gather near the fire, wide-eyed and sticky-fingered from dried milk sweets. You lean back and watch the sparks rise into the velvet sky. Later, after most have turned in, you sit with one of your visiting cousins, passing a slab of sharp goat cheese back and forth like a sacred relic. He talks about his travels, south to the edge of the desert, where cheese is sun-dried on flat rocks and crumbles like sand. You tell him about the plum cheese girl and your plan to make a version with rose hips. He raises an eyebrow but doesn't mock you. That's cousin love. You drift off to sleep with a full stomach and the faint sound of snoring goats just outside the yurt. By morning, the visitors are gone, their place marked only by scattered footprints and a single cheese rind left behind like a quiet thank you. You return to your routine. Stirring curds, airing slabs, recording changes in taste and texture. You experiment more boldly now, pressing some rounds under stones, washing others in salted mare's milk, even infusing one with dried seaweed a traveling monk left behind. Your grandmother watches your antics with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant pride. One day, your experiments go wrong. You unwrap a promising round only to find it slimy and sour in a way that's deeply concerning. You gag. Even the goats seem offended. You bury the failed cheese under a tree, muttering apologies. Failure is part of the process, but this one hurts. Still, you learn. Next time, less humidity. Fewer risks. Or maybe better ones. A few weeks later, a caravan passes through bearing news from far-off cities, Karakoram, Samarkand, even whispers of lands beyond the mountains. One trader tells of cheeses made in clay pots, aged in caves, or stirred with wooden paddles shaped like dragons. You scribble notes furiously. Another mentions a merchant who builds entire yurts just for cheese aging, controlled air, filtered light, pure obsession. You're intrigued. You begin building your own aging yurt. Just a small one. Just for the serious stuff. You line the shelves with pine planks, place your best slabs inside, and hang a braided rope of garlic and dried juniper at the door for luck. You name it the Cheese Temple. Your brother renames it the Cheese Cave. The goats are indifferent. You spend more and more time inside, adjusting airflow, checking humidity, whispering encouragement to your slabs like they're sleeping babies or fragile dreams. And maybe they are. It's in this tiny yurt, weeks later, that you have a moment, a perfect one. The sun hits a slab just right. The smell is sharp, clean, alive. You cut a sliver, taste it, and everything goes quiet. It's good. Not just edible. Not just decent. But good. You sit down, cross-legged on the dirt floor, and take another bite. The goats snort in the background. A wind stirs the garlic rope. You did it. And tomorrow? You'll try again. You're officially a cheesemaker now. Not just by birthright or by accident, but by experience. Your slabs no longer look like forgotten bricks or mysterious biological experiments. They have shape, texture, scent, personality. Each batch hums with its own quiet story, its own temperamental weather of taste. Even your grandmother, who has long treated praise like a scarce spice, recently muttered, "Not awful," after biting into your newest Timeish round. High praise indeed. The Cheese Temple becomes a subject of village gossip. Some claim you've gone too far. Others want to build their own. A few older herders ask you, a little sheepishly, if they can store their own experimental wheels inside, just for a moon cycle or two. You allow it, of course, because what's the fun in solitude if you can't show off a little? And then comes the invitation. A parchment rolled tight, sealed with knotted leather cord. It arrives by courier on horseback, carried in a pouch alongside millet cakes and a small pouch of salt. You unroll it slowly, squinting at the curling script. The Khan's court, yes, that court, is holding a feast to mark the change of season. A dairy feast. with a cheese competition. And you're invited. You stare at the note for a full minute before your grandmother snatches it and reads it aloud with much theatrical throat clearing. Then she raises her eyebrows and says, "You better not embarrass the goats." Packing takes days. What do you bring to a royal cheese feast? You agonize. Hopeful regret is too personal. Fire blossom is too soft. You settle on 3 offerings: stone whisper, a sharp, aged slab wrapped in pine bark; moon cradle, a delicate sheep cheese pressed with dried pear; and storm hide, a firm, smoky goat cheese that smells like it's been struck by lightning and kissed by a forest. Each is wrapped carefully in layers of felt and beeswax cloth, nestled into a satchel lined with clean wool. Your grandmother insists on blessing each one. She waves dried herbs over them, murmurs words you only half understand, and slaps your shoulder. "There," she says. "Now they won't betray you." The journey to the court takes days. You travel in a caravan of herders, merchants, and musicians, all bound for the same destination. The steppe rolls past like a lazy river of grass. Nights are filled with song and shared rations. Someone always has a tale about a cursed curd or a goat that gave prophetic milk. You listen, laugh, and try not to panic. Historians still argue whether cheese competitions at the Mongol court were truly about culinary skill or thinly veiled displays of clan prestige. Some say the judges were rigorous, others say they were just hungry. One scroll even claims that a sour curd once sparked a minor feud that ended with a marriage, 3 goats changing hands, and an awkward apology dance. Either way, you pack a clean tunic. The court rises on the horizon like a temporary city, hundreds of yurts, banners fluttering, chairs glowing with lamplight. You can smell spice and sweat and anticipation from miles away. The guards wave you through after inspecting your satchel. One of them tries to sneak a sample. You slap his hand. He grins. Inside, everything buzzes. Traders hawk silk and soapberries. Wrestlers stretch beside scholars debating star maps. Children chase each other under the watchful gaze of horses that look only slightly amused. You're led to the dairy pavilion, a grand tent lined with pale blue silk and rows of wooden tables. Each participant has a space marked by a carved wooden token. Yours bears the symbol for sun over hill, a sign of luck, your grandmother says. You arrange your cheeses carefully, slicing small portions and fanning them onto dried leaves like a shy banquet. Then, you wait. Judges arrive with serious faces and heavy robes. Some are nobles, others are monks, one looks suspiciously like a very stern baker. They examine, sniff, nibble, murmur. Occasionally someone nods. Occasionally someone raises an eyebrow so high it could knock over a camel. A young judge bites into your storm hide, chews thoughtfully, then turns and whispers something to the older man beside him. The older man nods. Then asks for another slice. You pretend not to notice. Your heart is making goat noises. Between judging rounds, you wander the grounds. There are cheese sculptures, some elegant, some tragic, butter carvings of mythical beasts, and a small goat in a golden harness named Sage. You wonder aloud if Sage is a cheese judge. The goat blinks slowly, then sneezes on your boots. Fair enough. At sunset, the winners are announced. You're not first. You're third. And that's more than enough. Your name is called. You stand, hands shaking slightly, and accept a carved wooden plaque shaped like a wheel. The Khan steward nods approvingly. A few people clap. One elderly herder gives you a wink and a thumbs up. You sit back down, dizzy with pride and possibly hunger. Stone Whisper is nearly gone, eaten by curious attendees. Moon Cradle has been praised for its subtlety. Storm Hide has been declared strangely moving by someone who may have been crying. That night, under the stars, you toast with milk wine and flatbread. Other cheesemakers slap your back, offer you trade, and beg for your pair drying technique. You promise nothing but smile a lot. A man offers to buy storm hide. You decline. You keep it for yourself. You return home a little taller. Not literally, though your boots have a new layer of prestige dust caked to them, but spiritually. The cheese temple seems smaller now, but no less sacred. You open its flap and breathe in that wonderful, musty funk. Your slabs greet you like old friends, some finished, some still transforming. You touch them gently, as if they might whisper stories from your absence. Word of your prize travels faster than you do. By the time you're unpacking, 2 neighboring families arrive with cheese samples tucked in linen pouches and nervous smiles. They want you to taste, to comment, maybe even bless them with a nod of approval. One mother brings her teenage son, who insists his walnut cow curd is revolutionary. You taste it. It's not. But you encourage him anyway. Your grandmother offers a rare compliment. She says your storm hide reminded her of a cheese her own grandfather once made during a comet year, sharp, stubborn, and full of fire. She pats your cheek and mutters something about not letting fame ruin your curd ratios. Soon, you're teaching without realizing it. A small circle of eager learners forms, young herders, curious cousins, even a grumpy monk from the next ridge over. They bring questions, odd ingredients, and wildly inconsistent techniques. You correct gently, laugh often, and share your mistakes as freely as your successes. The failed seaweed slab? Lesson 1. The exploding goat milk bag? Lesson 2. You sketch little diagrams in the dirt, draw curd textures in butter, and sometimes just gesture wildly until someone figures out what you mean. You call your method cloud logic, half instinct, half sky reading, all trial and error. Historians still argue whether Mongol cheesemaking knowledge was passed through formal apprenticeships or absorbed casually through campfire osmosis. Some scrolls mention dedicated dairy elders who trained young cheesemakers for years. Others suggest most of it was learned by watching, guessing, and occasionally crying over a spoiled batch. You suspect both are true. One day, you're invited to a wedding. The bride's family wants a special cheese for the ceremony, a union cheese, aged exactly 12 days, layered with herbs, and tied with horsehair string. You're honored. You work on it like it's a piece of your soul. It turns out perfectly. The couple names it promise rind. You try not to tear up. Later that night, during the wedding feast, a toddler sneaks a huge bite of promise rind and immediately bursts into tears from its saltiness. Everyone laughs. The bride says that's a good omen, real love makes you cry sometimes. By your 3rd year as a cheesemaker, you've made over 100 varieties. Some are regional hits, like your honey curd wafers, perfect for long rides. Others remain experimental oddities, including the infamous night slab, aged in a sealed gourd under a wolf pelt. Your uncle says it tastes like loneliness. You take that as a compliment. A traveling scholar stops by one evening and hears you speaking to your slabs. He watches for a while, then says softly, "You sound like you're praying." You think for a second, then shrug. Maybe you are. You begin keeping better records. Not just wax tablet scrawls, but a full scroll, a cheese chronicle. You log textures, weather conditions, mood during curdling, and the behavior of nearby goats. You include tiny drawings and dramatic titles, the curdening, crumbstorm, the reek that lingered. It's part recipe, part memoir, part comedy. Visitors now leave offerings at your cheese temple, a sprig of mint, a scrap of poetry, one perfectly smooth pebble. No one's sure why, but you don't mind. The temple has become more than a shed. It's become an idea. Sometimes, you lie awake listening to the yurt creak in the wind, wondering where your cheese goes after it leaves you. Who eats it? Does it cheer a tired soldier? Quiet a fussy child? Make a noble sigh with satisfaction? You hope so. One afternoon, a messenger from the capital appears. He presents a scroll with official seals and excessive titles. It's an invitation, no, a request, for you to teach at the Royal Dairy School in Karakoram. You laugh. Then you read it again. It's real. You spend days deciding. Karakoram is far. Fancy. Full of politics and pressure. But also full of opportunity. You think about your goats. Your students. Your slabs. Your grandmother. She hands you a wheel of stormhide and says, take a piece of home with you. So you go. The city is chaos and wonder. The school is massive. You get your own teaching yurt, a tiny cheese lab, and more questions than answers. You teach by doing, fumbling, laughing, and confessing your worst cheese failures right alongside your best. You tell them cheese is patience made visible. That every slab is a conversation with time. That curds are alive, even when they smell like despair. You even teach them about Demetrios and Fat Nikos, the imaginary dolphin cheese judges from your lonelier days. The students adore it. Some of your students write back years later. One opens a cheese bazaar near the Great Wall. Another becomes a caravan chef, feeding soldiers and sages alike. One creates a cheese so soft it has to be eaten with a spoon and whispers. You're proud of them all. Eventually, you return home. Your goats remember you. Your cousin's walnut curd has actually gotten decent. Your cheese temple still stands, weathered and perfect. You carve a new slab, aged pear, pressed pine, and a pinch of dried common ash, a joke from your Karakoram days. You call it return. And as you cut the first slice and offer it to your grandmother, who now uses a cane made from twisted yak horn, she smiles and says, not bad. You take that as the highest honor. And now, under this quiet dome of stars, the fire dies low in your yurt. The wind outside hums gently through the felt walls, like a lullaby in a language older than memory. You sit cross-legged, the final taste of that pear and pine cheese still lingering on your tongue, sweet, sharp, with just a hint of distance. Around you, everything is still. The goats have settled. The night has stretched itself thin and soft over the steppe. You think of how far you've come, from your first sour batch curdled under a skeptical moon, to competitions and students and scrolls filled with notes only you can decipher. Cheese, as it turns out, was never just food. It was a mirror. A diary. A kind of alchemy that took time and trouble and turned them into something solid and sustaining. The Mongolian winds still argue at night, just like they always have. Historians still argue too, about methods and meanings, about whether goat milk curds changed empires or just fed tired children. But none of that matters right now. Because in this moment, wrapped in wool and memory, you are still. And the world feels held. Your slabs rest nearby, breathing quietly in the dark. The air smells of wood smoke, felt, and a whisper of salt. You close your eyes. Somewhere far away, another fire flickers. Another slab waits to be turned. Another nomad kneels by a brazier and listens for the soft sigh of perfect curd. And so it continues. The wind, the flame, the cheese. Sweet dreams.